On this day, the 25th of November, 1917, the Germans attacked and defeated a Portuguese army in Mozambique, just across the border from German East Africa. This became known as the Battle of Ngomano. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. Ngomano. I'm pretty sure the N and the G are Ngomano. This was a town on the Portuguese side of the border. And the leader of the Germans was a great man called Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck. Vorbeck had been in German East Africa, which is present-day Tanzania, since 1907. Before this, he had been active in German Southwest Africa, putting down native revolts, present-day Namibia, and he'd also been assigned to various places in mainland Germany. He was already a blooded officer at this point. At the beginning of 1914, he recognized that any fighting in Africa was going to be a sideshow to what was going to happen in Europe. He decided with his small force, it was only a few thousand men, plus another few thousand natives, that he would go on the offensive. And between 1914-15, he was very successful. He managed to defeat the British many times. He invaded British East Africa itself and northern Rhodesia, modern-day Kenya and Zambia, and he always kept the British on the defensive, even though they had much more men, they were better supplied, and he was, to all effects, cut off from his homeland. If he had been sensible, he would have surrendered in 1914, as some others did. But he decided he wasn't going to do that. And for the entirety of the war, he kept the British bogged down in East Africa. Indeed, he only surrendered after the armistice in November 1918. Anyway, in 1916, Portugal had been asked by the British to seize German and Austrian ships at that point, which were docked in Lisbon. Portugal did this. It has an old treaty with Britain going back many centuries, and so they, just as they did in the Napoleonic Wars, they sided with Britain here. They did so, and Germany declared war on the 9th of March 1916 in retaliation for this. So, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck, who was fighting in East Africa, fighting the British, was getting desperate in 1917. It had already been a year since the Germans had declared war on Portugal, so he decided he was going to go into Mozambique and he was going to try to scavenge as much as he could. They were running out of weapons, ammunition, food. They were being chased around, a merry chase around the Serengeti by the British. So he needed more supplies. And where can you get it? Well, Portugal had been neutral up until 1916, but now they were fair game. They were now a belligerent in this war. Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck and his army had just inflicted another defeat upon the British. However, the Battle of Mahiwa, present-day Tanzania as well, so this was in German East Africa itself. But even though he'd won that battle, he had lost more men than he could have, or he should have, and he lost a lot of supplies and used up a lot of ammunition. So it was a Pyrrhic victory. He needed to get supplies soon. So he marched towards the Portuguese frontier. On the Portuguese side, Portuguese general was John Teixeira Pinto. I really don't know how to pronounce Portuguese name. Joao, I think that's John, I think. And Teixeira, Teixeira? I'm not sure how to pronounce that. Pinto, that's pretty straightforward. So he had a couple of thousand men on the Portuguese side. And he was digging in, and he was being warned by the British that the Lion of Africa, as he was been called, was coming straight toward him. So Pinto, I'll just call him Pinto, didn't actually believe that that was going to happen, and so they were completely unprepared for when the Germans turned up. The Germans outmaneuvered them very quickly. They had less supplies, less ammunition, about the same number of men, and they very quickly surrounded the Portuguese army and defeated them, taking almost all of their material, their food, and their supplies. This was a disaster for the British, because it meant that the Lion of Africa, Vorbeck, was going to be able to continue going for the next year. Because at this point he would have been done if the Portuguese had thrown him back. The British were already behind him. He could have been destroyed. His forces could have been destroyed. But the Portuguese, by not listening to advice, not listening to intelligence, allowed him to overwhelm them. So, after the war, Paul von Lettow-Vorbeck ended up going back home and to a hero's welcome. He was one of the great heroes, along with the captain of the Emden. These were the people who inspired people at home in Germany, as opposed to the backstabbers in Weimar. Eventually he got involved in politics. He was conservative, a reactionary in a way, but he wasn't a Nazi, and he opposed the Nazis. At one point, when Hitler was in power, he offered Vorbeck the ambassadorship in London. Vorbeck apparently said something along the lines of "fuck you," although his son said he didn't say it as politely as that. He was not very enthused with the German regime of the 30s and 40s. And he survived that war, although he was made homeless due to Allied bombing. But people in Tanzania, the people he led, the men he led, the Africans, they would regularly correspond with him. When Tanzania was becoming independent, they asked him for advice. He became friends with Jan Smuts, the Prime Minister of South Africa during the First and Second World Wars, and they regularly corresponded until his death in 1950. He was praised not only by his own people, but by everyone who met him and fought against him and fought with him. He inspired loyalty and devotion, and he seems to have been a thoroughly decent man. And on this day, the 25th of November, 1917, he won the Battle of Ngomano, defeated the Portuguese, and fought on for another year. If you like these videos, come back for more. Subscribe, like, and comment.